My name is Jennifer Chan, and this is the story of how I learned that the quietest person in the room can sometimes hold the most power. Life has a strange sense of humor. One moment, you're fetching coffee for self-important relatives. The next, you're signing the papers that end their careers. But let's go back to where it all started. Aunt Victoria was the outlier in our family, a rebel in a sea of tradition. While her siblings pursued careers in medicine, and finance, she built a tech empire from the ground up. Under her leadership, Chen Innovations became a $2 billion powerhouse. Yet you'd never guess it. She dressed plainly, drove a decade-old sedan, and lived in the same modest house she bought before her first big contract. I was the only one who really knew her. While my cousins Marcus and Diana basked in the glow of their privileged upbringings at schools, family name-dropping, luxury vacations, he spent weekends at Aunt Victoria's house, learning to code on her aging desktop. Business isn't about fancy degrees, Jenny, she told me once as I wrestled with a debugging issue. It's about seeing what others overlook. When I was 12, my parents died in a car crash. Aunt Victoria took me in. Whisper circulated among the family that she did it out of guilt for not helping her struggling brother. But I knew better. She saw something in me that no one else did. For 15 years, I worked my way up at Chen Innovations, while Marcus and Diana drifted through college and partied their way through internships. I was deep in the trenches, handling customer service, shadowing engineers, refining products. They called me Aunt Victoria's shadow. I didn't mind. I was learning from a master. Then came the diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She faced it with the same steel resolve she brought to board, meetings direct, efficient, and unflinching. Jenny, she said one evening in her home office, I need you to promise me something. Anything, I said, holding back tears. Don't let them know how capable you are, not until the moment's right. She handed me a sealed envelope. Everything you need is in here, but timing is everything. At the time, I didn't understand, but I would. She passed quietly 3 months later. Her funeral was a parade of industry titans and opportunistic mourners. Marcus delivered a weepy eulogy about the aunt he barely visited. Diana cried for the cameras, clutching her designer bag like it was a relic. Then came the will. The reading was held at Chen Innovations headquarters. The family gathered me and siblings, their spouses, Marcus, Diana, and me. Everyone assumed Marcus, the eldest male heir, would inherit the company. That's how things were done in our traditional Chinese family. Mr. Patterson, Aunt Victoria's lawyer, began the reading. It started predictably. Gifts for longtime staff, charitable donations. Then came the twist. To my niece, Jennifer Chan, I leave my controlling interest in Chen Innovations of 20% of all voting shares. The remaining 30% shall be distributed among current employees, based on tenure. Chaos erupted. This is outrageous, Marcus shouted, his face crimson. She's barely qualified, no MBA, no experience running a company. Diana's voice cracked. We're her real family. Jenny was just the charity case. Their father, Uncle James, chimed in. There must be a mistake. Victoria wouldn't leave everything to the help. Mr. Patterson didn't flinch. The will is unambiguous, and for the record, Jennifer has served as deputy CEO quietly and with full legal documentation for the past 2 years. I sat in silence, remembering Aunt Victoria's words. Not yet, I thought. The family meeting afterward took place at Uncle James's mansion, paid for, ironically, with one of Victoria's early loans. I was invited, but it was clear I wasn't seen as a peer. Jenny, be a dear and serve the coffee, Aunt Helen said sweetly, her smile tight. I complied, listening as they plotted around me. We need to challenge the will, Uncle James declared. She must have been delusional near the end. Marcus sneered as I poured his drink. She can't run a tech company. Look at her, not even dressed like an executive. He had a point. He wore a basic blouse and slacks. What he didn't know was that I owned the building housing his favorite designer brand. The board won't support her, Diana added, scrolling through selfies. They'll want someone polished, educated. They strategize for horse legal options. PR moves, boardroom alliances. No one addressed me directly. To them, I was invisible, just like always. Eventually, Uncle James turned to me. "This doesn't have to be difficult. Sign over your shares to Marcus, and we'll make sure you're taken care of comfortably. It's what's best for everyone." I smiled politely and poured myself a cup. The moment was coming, but not yet. I looked around at their eager, self-satisfied faces, the same people who had barely acknowledged me at family gatherings, who had mocked my bond with Aunt Victoria, who whispered charity case behind my back like it was my name. "I'll think about it," I said softly, gathering the empty coffee cups. "The board meets Monday. I'll have my answer then." Their smiles returned instantly, confident they had won. Marcus even reached over and patted my head like I was a child. "Good girl," he said smugly. "Knew you'd see sense." As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I pulled out my phone and the envelope Aunt Victoria had given me. Inside were access codes, legal documents, and a handwritten letter. "The time for hiding is over," she'd written. "Show them who you really are." I smiled, then began sending a series of emails I had drafted months ago. Monday's meeting was going to be unforgettable. What Marcus and Diana didn't know, what none of them had ever bothered to learn, was that while they were polishing their public images, I had spent the last 15 years quietly becoming the heart of Chen Innovations. Every major deal bore my signature. Every successful product launch had my code embedded in its foundation. Every key executive had risen on my recommendation. They thought Monday would be their coronation. They had no idea. Monday dawned crisp and clear. I arrived at Chen Innovations headquarters at 6 a.m., 2 hours ahead of the meeting. The security guards nodded in quiet respect. They knew who I was. They always had. Rumors swirled that Marcus and Diana had spent the weekend courting board members, scrambling to secure votes for a coup. Let them try. I dressed in the black dress Aunt Victoria had given me for my last birthday's lake. Simple, flawlessly tailored. "Power isn't about looking powerful," she once told me. "It's about being powerful." At 7:45 a.m., I watched from my office as Marcus and Diana strutted into the building with Uncle James and Aunt Helen in tow, all of them dressed like they were headed to a fashion shoot, not a boardroom reckoning. "Time to say hello," I murmured, gathering the photos I'd prepared. The boardroom buzzed with hushed voices as I entered. 12 board members Saturday around the long table. At the far end, my family had claimed their seats. Marcus, already in the CEO's chair, with the same smirk he always had when he thought he'd won. "Jenny," Diana chirped, not looking up from her phone, "be dear and get us coffee before you go." I smiled. Of course. But first, I pressed a button on the intercom. "Sarah, bring them in." My assistant, whom my cousins had always assumed was some leftover from Aunt Victoria's, entered with a card stacked with photos and began distributing them with calm precision. "What is this?" Marcus asked, snatching at one. "Patience," I said smoothly. "All will be explained." When every board member had a folder, I stepped toward the head of the table. Marcus remained in the CEO seat, still clinging to the illusion. "You're in my seat," I said quietly. He laughed. "Come on, Jenny. We all know Chen. Enough." "You're in my seat," I repeated, louder. Something in my tone broke through. He stood reluctantly, muttering something under his breath. I took the seat and faced the board. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "what you're holding contains everything you need to understand the last 5 years at Chen Innovations. You'll find detailed reports of every major company decision, product launches, partnership negotiations, restructuring plans. 90% bear my signature. Decisions once attributed to others were, in fact, mine." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I didn't pause. "You'll also find evidence of questionable financial activities." "Marcus, would you care to explain why $2 million of company funds were redirected to cover your gambling debts?" He blanched. "Bets. That's confidential." "Diana," I said, turning to her as she flipped pages with trembling hands, "perhaps you'd like to explain the shell consulting firm you used to invoice the company for services that were never rendered." You can't, Prof. Oh, but I can. Aunt Victoria and I kept meticulous records. We let it go, hoping you'd grow into your roles. You didn't. Uncle James shot to his feet, furious. Now just a minute. Sit down, Uncle, I said, not raising my voice. Page 12. The illegal loans, the misused company accounts, the offshore transfers. Do you want me to keep going? He dropped back into his chair. Ashen. I turned to the board. I know some of you were approached over the weekend, promised new leadership, fresh vision. What I offer is continuity tempered by experience and sharpened by clarity. You already know my work. You just didn't know it was mine. Now you do. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the chair of the board leaned forward and said, Ms. Chen, would you be willing to stay and lead Chen Innovations? I met his gaze and gave a slight smile. I already am. I had worked quietly for years, mastering every aspect of this company, while others claimed credit for my work. I led them because Aunt Victoria taught me that real power doesn't crave recognition. It demands results. I clicked the remote, and the screen behind me came to life with charts and graphs. Under my direct management, though others with a spotlight, your productivity rose by 200%. Client retention is at 98%. Profit margins doubled. The board leaned in, some nodding slowly. As puzzle pieces fell into place, they were starting to understand why certain departments had quietly flourished. Nah, I said, pausing just long enough to draw their attention. We have a choice. I pressed another button. A new set of documents appeared, on screen detailed, time-stamped, and damning. You can back my cousin's attempted coup, in which case I'll be forced to release this information to the media and proper authorities, or... I clicked again, revealing forward-looking projections, strategic partnerships, and designs for a product line still under wraps. We can move ahead with the expansion plans I've been developing for the past year. 5 new tech centers, collaborations with elite research institutions, and innovations that will place Chen Innovations years ahead of the competition. Silence followed. The board exchanged looks, calculating, weighing risks, doing the math. Finally, Mr. Rodriguez, the longest-serving board member, spoke. I moved to formally appoint Jennifer Chen as CEO of Chen Innovations, effective immediately. Seconded. Several voices echoed. This is absurd. Marcus leapt to his feet, face flushed. She's nothing. Just a little orphan. Who? You're fired, I said sharply. Security is waiting outside to escort you out. Diana, you too. Your personal items have already been packed. Diana gasped. You can't do this. We're family. I met her eyes, steady. Family. Was I family when you had me serve coffee? When you laughed at my clothes, when you called me a charity case behind my back? No, Diana, you made it clear what family meant to you. At my signal, security entered. The guards who had known the truth about my role for years stood by without hesitation. Uncle James and Helen, I turned to them. You can remain as silent partners and keep your shares, or you can follow your children out the door. Decide now. They exchanged glances, watching Marcus and Diana being led away. They gave stiff nods and remained seated. When the room finally settled, I turned back to the board. Now shall we discuss those expansion plans? The hours that followed were focused and fruitful. By the end of the day, my position was secure. Our next phase was greenlit, and a press release announcing the new CEO of Chen Innovations was making waves across every major news outlet. That evening, I Saturday alone, in what used to be Aunt Victoria's office, no mind staring at her framed photo on the desk. You taught me well, I whispered. Power doesn't shout, it listens, it learns, and it waits. My phone buzzed with messages, relatives suddenly rediscovering their affection for me. I ignored them all, except one. It was from Maria, Aunt Victoria's old housekeeper, who had been one of the few to show me kindness in my youth. You did good, Miss Jenny. Your aunt would be proud. I smiled, turning my chair to face the city skyline. Chen Innovations would thrive under my leadership, not because of legacy or bloodlines, but because I had earned every step, every late night, every overlooked idea, every win they never saw coming. As for Marcus and Diana, last I heard, they were trying to start their own company. Good luck, it's time they learn what hard work actually looks like. As for me, I keep Aunt Victoria's lessons close. True success isn't about being seen as powerful. It's about being powerful. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who owns it.